Welcome to month 12 of Cheshire Quilters Guild 2017 block of the month. This month we're going to finish things up with the second border and the eyelash binding. We did a border last time, so I'm not going to demonstrate that again. What I am going to do is show you some tips that I have for doing binding in general, or putting strips together, and then I'm going to finish up with showing you how to do the eyelash binding. So the first thing I do is I've got all my strips cut here, and I'm just stacking them up one on top of each other, and I'm putting all of the ends together that are the same. I just like to do this for consistency. If you have a fabric that is directional, then this makes the binding look a little bit better. Or, you know, you can use the same technique for doing borders also, that you have to hook together. Now I've stacked all but one of them up here together, and I purposely left that one off. Now I'm going to take my ruler, and I'm just going to snip off the selvage end. And then this ruler has a nice feature. It's got the 45s that come from either corner, and they intersect here, and there's that extra little straight part. Well, if I take the 45 and I lay it on the bottom of the strip set, and the square end, I can trim, and now I can sew a regular 45 line. Now I'm going to move one of these strips off my pile. I'm going to move the other end over. I'm going to straighten it up, and then we're going to trim the other end. Okay, so now I've got the ends with the selvage with the writing. Stack these up. And now I'm going to bring in, I took one strip off the stack that's already been trimmed, and now I'm going to take the one I had left off before and bring that over. Again, I'm going to trim off the selvages and use that 45 and that nice square part to trim off the ends. Now I need to bring this end over. Now I have all my things stacked up, and this is what I can do. I start with my top strip, which is square on one end. It's square on this end. When I go to my sewing machine, I can now take the next strip in my stack, bring it over, and I can just lay the two pieces on top of each other and stitch a standard 1/4 inch seam. Now I'm going to do that with all my strips. And what happens when you get finished is the seam, when you press it, no matter whether you press it to one side or the other, or if you press it open, you don't have any dog ears. That little section on your ruler takes care of, so you don't have any dog ears. So I'm going to finish up my bindings, strips, and I'll meet you back here. Okay, here's a binding that I have the narrower and the wider strips sewn together. And notice that I followed the instructions. I have pressed my seam toward the narrower binding. Now, which one is the one that's going to peek out and which one is the outside? It's kind of counterintuitive. This is the outside binding that you're going to see, and the gray is what's going to peek out. And you'll see that if you fold the binding in half the way you normally do, and I'll take this over and press it in just a minute. What you'll see I get, there's my little eyelash binding, my little accent of gray inside my white and purple. So this is going to be what's you're going to fold over, and this is what, so next step is to do this folding, press it good, make sure you've got a nice straight little part that's sticking out all the way out long, and then I'll show you what you do when you actually sew it onto your quilt. Alright, now I'm ready to put my binding on, and I'm on the back of the quilt. That's where you want to hook the binding on, and you want to hook it with the wider strip, your accent, facing up, because what's going to happen is after we stitch this down, we're going to fold it around to the front, and then we're going to have our nice little eyelash or accent to the binding. So I'm going to start sewing the binding on, and I'm going to come back when I get to the corner. I want to show you the trick I use for mitering the corners. Okay, I've zoomed in on the corner so you can see how I stitch. I stitch the 1/4 inch seam all the way down till I get a 1/4 inch from the next edge. And then I stop with my needle down and I stitch on the angle out to the corner. That gives me something to fold back against when I go to miter my corner. So I fold back. Let me zoom out so you can see what I'm doing. So I fold it back and then I fold it down so my raw edge is even with the raw edge of my quilt top again. And that gives me a nice 45-degree corner right there. And now I'm going to pin this and go back to my machine and finish stitching on this other side. Now the thing I want you to note is that when I'm actually stitching a binding on, when I'm not trying to show someone, I stitch down, I stitch off the corner, lift with the needle, well, it doesn't really matter, needle down or not, because it's not in the fabric. I lift the presser foot up and I do this folding right there at the sewing machine, so I don't actually cut the thread. So the thread is still connected together when I start sewing on down the next side, and I just start at the edge, 1/4 inch seam all the way down. Okay, we'll come back. I'll show you how I press these out. Okay, I've got my binding sewed on, and again with the outside of the binding, the narrower strip down against the back as you stitch it on. I did my little corner stitching trick on these, and then the next thing I did is I went to the ironing board and I pressed the binding from the back. I pressed the binding away, so I made that a nice crisp seam on the back. Then from the front I pressed it over, and I also did my miters. I pressed because the way I fold my miters when I stitch it down, I'm going to press this side in first, and then I'm going to get a nice crisp press here on that angle, and then I'm going to fold it over and I'm going to press that side down. And if you look, my little accent band, my eyelash binding, meets exactly. Now if I'm a little concerned about whether this is going to stay in place, I can put a pin in that I can remove as I'm stitching the binding down. The nice thing about the eyelash binding is that you can finish it off by machine. So I'm going to put 2 pins, one from each direction to really hold it where I want it to be. So the nice thing is you finish this by machine. So what we're going to do is, or what you're going to do is going to come back with a heavier weight thread, like a 12 weight thread that you can stitch right on that thing as an accent. You know, top stitching is a decorative treatment. You can stitch along there with a narrow little decorative stitch on your machine. Unfortunately for you, I haven't decided which I want to do on this quilt yet, so I'm not going to demonstrate that, but that's the only thing left to finish off this quilt, besides putting on a label, is stitching down the eyelash binding. So I hope you enjoyed the 2017 Cheshire Quilters Guild Block of the Month, and maybe I'll see you back here next year when I do the 2018 Cheshire Quilters Guild Block of the Month.